2-10. When the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, "Go, marry a promiscuous woman and have children with her. For like an adulterous wife, this land is guilty of unfaithfulness to the Lord." So he married Gomer, daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. Then the Lord said to Hosea, "Call him Jezreel, because I will soon punish the house of Jehu for the massacre of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of Israel. In that day I will break Israel's bow in the valley of Jezreel." Gomer conceived again and gave birth to a daughter. And then the Lord said to Hosea, "Call her Lo-Ruhamah," which means not loved. "For I will no longer show love to Israel, that I should at all forgive them. Yet I will show love to Judah, and I will save them, not by bow, sword, or battle, or by horses or horsemen, but I, the Lord their God, will save them." And after she had weaned Lo-Ruhamah, Gomer had another son. Then the Lord said, "Call him Lo-Ammi," which means not my people. "For you are not my people, and I am not your God. Yet the Israelites will be like the sand on the seashore, which cannot be measured or counted. In the place where it was said to them, 'You are not my people,' they will be called children of the living God." Woo. Amen.
Testing 1, 2, there we go. Who picked that scripture? Cheryl, here's a little secret of liturgy. When you come to those names, you pronounce them as if you knew how to speak them and know them, and never leave any doubt. Everyone will go, "I didn't know that's how that was pronounced." Won't you pray with me this morning? God of mercy and grace, we call upon your holy name to instruct our hearts and to fill us anew with love and light. And in that light might you cast upon the dark places within us, places of reformation, transformation, and renewal. Help us to find the strength to give over the life you've granted to us to you, to walk in you, with you in strange and new and glorious ways. Bless the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts. Might it be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. My wife and I were blessed with sons. She always wanted a daughter. I was present for the birth of 3 of them, and I'm never quite sure where the 4th one came from. You see, God granted us Nick and Ben and Andrew. But I'm not sure if there was an apparition in our house, if a neighbor kid would come over every once in a while. I really didn't know what was going on. But you see, that 4th one is the one that tests us the most. It's the one that challenges us. It's the one that causes all the trouble in the house. For when we turned to our 3 naturally born sons and said, "Whose turn is it to do the dishes?" they all announced the name of the 4th son. Not me. Do you have a not me in your house? We come home from being out on date night and the boys are watching the younger one, and there's to be something broken or left on that should have been turned off. Who did this? Not me. We really want to find the parents of not me. because he has a lot of explaining to do. It's interesting, isn't it? This life we live. We live in a not me generation, don't we? And the problem that God has with Israel in that most interesting text that Cheryl picked today, I'll leave you to believe that, is that God's pretty angry. He's angry at a people that seek to say, not me, instead of, okay, I did it. I'll share with you a little bit about my life, living in the not me generation, growing up in it. My life of crime in my 7th grade year started in the fall. I didn't wake up with the intention of falling into the trap of stealing and harboring, coveting things I didn't rightfully own. You see, I had left the Catholic grade schools and joined the middle school, public middle school for 2 years. In that I met a friend named Tony. Tony seemed to be a bit more worldly than I was. And we became friends and palled around together. Tony lived on the other side of town, so if I wanted to walk with Tony home, we kind of walked almost down the center and then went off on our separate ways. It took me longer to get home than my sisters, but Mom knew I was with Tony. One day we stumbled into a party store because Tony had an extra $1 that he had found. Now, for those people in Ohio, let me explain what a party store is, if you don't know. You go to party stores in Michigan where they have alcohol and pop and chips and candy bars. I was interested in 2 of those items that day. Tony and I made our way back to the cooler and we took a Coke out. Now, I have to tell you, in my household, pop was forbidden fruit. And so Tony said he had some extra money and even had enough for each of us to get a pop and him to also get a candy bar, which he swore he would split with me. Boy, this was heaven. We made our way to the counter, and the employees that particular day were doing something funny I'd never seen before. They had a mirror on the counter and they had these little white stripes there, and they were sucking the powder up into their nose. Tony and I don't know what was going on there. Innocent as all can be, I put my soda on the counter, candy bar. The guy looked at me and said, "Take it." So I started to head out the door. I was raised, you don't take something you don't pay for that you haven't earned. The guy calls back, "Son, take it." So I took the soda. We're standing outside, and I said to Tony, "What is going on here?" And Tony says, "You see, they don't want us around while they're doing drugs." Why would they give us soda? Why don't they just tell us to scat or lock the door? And he said, "Well, that's so that we don't share the news of what they're doing." That Coke didn't taste right. Coca-Cola, so let me be clear. Wow. That Pepsi didn't taste right that day. But you know, we learned something. After a couple of weeks, we went back to the party store. Tony still had his $1 burning in his pocket. We grabbed a soda. We grabbed a candy bar. We made it to the counter. And we looked at our employees and we just smiled. "Go ahead. Take it." Thus was the routine until early in the winter months, as we drew toward the Advent season and the weather turned cold. We showed up one day and there were different employees who didn't quite understand the new system that we had worked out with the old ones. I don't know, it says somewhere in the Bible, "Thou shalt not steal." and I knew what I was doing. But it didn't seem as bad as what those other guys were doing. And after all, they're the ones who told us, go ahead and take it. And thus my life of crime started. Many more stories to come over how I took what wasn't mine. No one, I believe, wakes up on a particular day and says, you know, today I'm going to start my life away from God. Sometimes we stumble into those opportunities that challenge us on whether we're going to walk in the way that God has for us or whether we're going to diverge on a different path. And if you were like me and came to Christ late, you might have formed some good old non-Christian habits. And that path just seems to be a little bit wider, a little bit more familiar, and a little bit more comfortable. So it was for Israel. I believe so it is for us today. Let's turn to our text for a minute. This new version of the NIV is probably one of the worst translations of this particular text. In the means to improve it, they actually stepped us farther back. For there is one Hebrew word that simply means adulterous woman, sometimes translated a prostitute, but that's not really accurate, because there was a different word for that vocation. God is calling Hosea to do something radical. Now, God's in the radical business, right? I mean, Abraham's called to sacrifice his son. Noah's called to build a big boat, right? Isaiah's called to walk around naked for several years. I'm sure that wouldn't raise any eyebrows. Jeremiah is told that he can't mourn the loss of his wife. All of these are signs of a God that calls us sometimes into the strangeness, into something unusual. And in the prophet's case, to something that people might even see as blasphemy. You don't expose your body. But Isaiah is called to run around naked as a symbol that God will strip Israel and Judah of their right to be called children of God, calling them to repent. Jeremiah is told, don't mourn your wife because I don't mourn the loss of my children of Israel. But Hosea is called to do something more unspeakable than I think the other two. To violate a very commandment of God. You see, in a society of honor and shame, in biblical times, without kind of understanding how this system works, your daughters were to remain pure. It brought dignity and honor to the family. And there's all sorts of regulations on what to do to stone a woman or to cast a family out if a woman is found in the marriage bed right after her wedding to not be a virgin. God calls Hosea to enter into a relationship with a woman who has or will be adulterous. The text is unclear. But it doesn't matter. Hosea knows what he's getting. Go and marry a woman that brings dishonor and shame not only to your household, but to your family name. And then have children with her. Now, we are not told in the text that the children are Hosea's. But Hosea doesn't. He finds Gomer. He marries her. Oh, the whispers around the village that day. The reputation that would carry her. You see, nothing was to remain hidden in those days. And so the village starts talking about strange little Hosea. And then he has children. Jezreel, ironically, is really translated from the Hebrew God saves. But the irony is that a battle takes place in a city named Jezreel, where Ahab and Jezebel are defeated by Israel's army, under a king that's really not following God's way at all. It's a battle no one really talks about. The analogy that might be appropriate in this world today is to name your child Holocaust, Auschwitz, something like that. Jezreel has a second child, a daughter. God calls upon him to name her once again, not loved, unloved. Who would name their child unloved or unlovable? And then another son, and name him rejected by God. Who in their right mind would do something like this? But it's a way of which this family is professing the state of the people. How many people want to be children of Hosea and Gomer? But you see, I think it's an indication of where we're at today as a world. We live in a not me society. We live in a society in which we love to name but not claim. Thus the title of the sermon. You see, in all my experience and time when I've sat down in a Bible study since I came to Christ, and either when I was leading or when I wasn't, we finished reading the text for the day and we asked the question, so what will we do that is different? What will we do that is new? How will I think and therefore live and act as a result of the text that I read today and God's instruction to my heart? And every time we ask that question, people look at their watches. Wonder how long we're going to be here on this topic. You can normally hear crickets. And generally speaking, what I find in our experience in the church today is simply this. Well, I know a person who, and we speak about them. We speak in ways in which we know people, but we never speak about ourselves. We are reluctant to say, I struggle with this. Someone came up to me the other day and asked me how I felt about people who are attracted to people of the same gender. I said, I don't know. How do you feel about people who are divorced? Well, yeah, you're right. I looked at him and said, how do you feel about fat people? What? Well, the Bible says we shouldn't have gluttony, right? I'm sitting here overweight. How do you feel about me? It's so easy to confess the sins of our neighbor and our community and our others. But we are so reluctant to name and claim for ourselves our own life that is not lived in the way of Christ. And folks, let me give you a little secret. I want you to reflect upon this question. How is it that you are different this year, this month, this week, because of your relationship with Christ? And if you struggle with the answer to that question, I might suggest that maybe you stop listening. You stop opening your heart to the calling of God, saying, what is this all about? You know, you and I don't need this. We love to sing and hear of the message of grace, but we refuse to live a life that is grace-filled. We talk about these things of grace, of prevenient grace, justifying grace, and sanctifying grace, seeing it almost in linear ways as we see life instead of cyclical ways. That God is calling me into awareness. I make a decision, and then I choose to live a life more sanctified. But if I do, then God calls me to awareness of something else. And then I have a choice. And then I walk in a way that is more godlike. And if I'm really seeking to spend time with God and spend time in His Word, He will call me to newness. He will call me to name and claim the places of my heart. And people will see a newness about me. What if church became a place of naming and claiming? Let me give you an example of what it means to be a place that is what I would describe as a spiritual infirmary, where all the people there are sick, and there is but one physician who holds the scars of persecution and injustice. What would the church be like if, when people came, and they actually confessed their sins, we said, oh, I am a sinner as well, in need of God's grace. In my last church, we started in a ministry with battered women. One such person decided to come to church one Sunday. After we had formed a relationship for about a month, not having any vehicle or anything, she asked if I'd pick her up. Sure. All the people in the church said, don't do it, don't go alone. I picked her up. I said, you have to come to Bible study first. Is that okay? Sure. We're starting a new book, What's So Amazing About Grace? By Philip Yancey. If you haven't read it, buy it. It's on the top 100 books of all time in Christianity. If you can't afford it, see me, I'll buy it for you. In the beginning of that book, in the first chapter, Philip Yancey tells the story of a friend of his in Chicago. His friend came upon a woman in his ministry who was a prostitute, who found it more feasible to sell her 4-year-old daughter to men for kinky sex and make more than what she could make in a whole evening. She sat with this pastor ashamed of the life that she was living, knowing it was wrong. And amidst his moral struggles in that moment, he asked her a question. Have you ever considered going to the church for help? Her response in the book is, church? I already feel terrible about myself. Why would I go to a place that makes me feel worse? End of story. We sat in our Bible study, and I decided we'd focus on this piece for the beginning of our study of that book. And I had every intentions of asking the question, if you were that pastor that day, what would you say to the woman? The next question was going to be, how do you think our church would respond to that woman? And the third question was going to be, after we had felt all good about ourselves, how would Jesus have responded to that woman? And if our answers were different, why? I started down my first line of question, and the young lady from the battered shelter turned and looked at me and she said, are you saying it's wrong to be a prostitute? Because I've had to do that to just make ends meet. Okay, now it's not the theoretical world. And in the moment, ready to answer the question, my thought went to the others sitting around the table. How are they going to respond to this? I said, ma'am, I am not here to judge you. I am here to walk with you and to say that I, in my own life, struggle with my own Christian walk that is not always of God. But I do want to tell you this. This is not, I believe, the life God had planned for you when he crafted you in your mother's womb. Will you allow us to journey with you in future days? And then I waited, looking around the table, everyone with their heads down. She said, I'd love to come back. You know, I've confessed that in many churches, and every time the response has been, there's the door. The exit signs are clearly marked. But you're saying I can stay in this community? And I said, I hope you thrive in this community. We are all sinners, saved by grace. We like the second part, but do we name and claim the first part in our lives? We are all still sinners. We have not yet arrived. There is more work God is doing on us and in us and through us that needs to be done. Okay, you can say amen. We're in church. I think it's in the Bible somewhere. She said to me, I can't keep asking you to give me rides. I said, why? Well, people will talk. Oh, Lordy. And bless her heart, this older lady in the group reached in her pocket and pulled out her cell phone. She said, honey, can we exchange numbers? I'd be glad to drive you to church. Now, as a minister, I can say whatever I want. I can say, you are welcome here, but you know, in some churches that isn't the case amongst the congregation, right? We speak of safe sanctuaries and places of grace. We don't always demonstrate that. And it might just take one person, to make a judgmental comment to drive those who need to be with us and amongst us so we can be more whole away. Other heads lifted and people said, you are welcome in this place. She was clean for 2 years. She found a job after training as a welder. She's engaged to be married, pregnant with her 3rd child. And she has found love not only within the community, but with a man who sees her as beautifully and wonderfully and fearfully made. But back to our issue. How often are we quick to name someone else's sin but not claim the sin in our own lives? If you are flatlining in your spiritual walk, I would call you to this, to prayer, to inviting God into the conversation. There's no wrong way to pray. There's no inadequate way to be. God simply wants a relationship in your time. Carve some time out just to be with God this week. If you don't know what to say, there's a little instruction book we can give you that might give you some words to think about. Maybe God has a word for you. The question isn't, when we come each week, do I agree or do I disagree with what I heard? You can disagree with what I've said, but I'm going to ask you, what word did God give you this week? Because it could be different than the message I'm trying to deliver to honor Him. And that's okay. I've had people tell me, wow, I got this out of your sermon, and I'm thinking to myself, when did I say that? Oh, that's God, not me. That's why we pray. And that's why when you look at me and say, that was a great sermon, let's give it to God, because it's not me. I'm just a person. I'm a sinner in need of grace. I hope I'm an instrument at times. I hope I get out of the way enough that you know God loves you and God wants a life so different than the one you came from. But it's going to require some effort on your part. It's going to require some naming and claiming. It's going to require some letting go and the courage to walk in a different way. And maybe you'll find yourself one day like Hosea or Jeremiah, Isaiah. Maybe you would find yourself like John or Peter, or Matthew, Paul. Whatever way God's calling you into the newness of life, using the newness of gifts, then we can come here and praise Him for the grace and for the forgiveness and the instruction and the relationship. And as cruel as God seems to be to Hosea and his lot in life, he ends our text with this today. Even though God has judgment for Israel, His mercy is displayed in the last sentence. Yet the Israelites will be like the sands of the seashore, which cannot be measured or counted. In the place where it was said to them, "You are not my people," they will be called children of the living God. They're called that because they chose to live a new life. Not the life of not me, but the life of me. The life of mine. And if there is someone amongst us or who comes to us who feels unworthy, I hope our message is uniformly, oh man, I'm unworthy too. Can we journey together in grace? Maybe you've lived a life of crime, as I have, and need to come forward. All of us are called to name, to claim. All of us are also invited to a table that cleanses us. It starts with repentance. It ends with forgiveness. And the symbols of that are a body broken and bloodshed. We partake at this table of communion a measure of God's reminder that God's grace is far more sufficient than anything we've done. Each week I want to invite you as you come forward, if you're in need of prayer and encouragement, myself and a Stephen minister will be sitting in the front row for you. You can spend your time with God. You can spend your time at the communion rail. I just pray that you spend your time finding newness of life, finding